Before we install Webpack as a global module and run it from the terminal, I want to talk about why it's generally a bad idea to install global modules, whether you're using Yarn or NPM. We're going to explore why it's a bad idea, and we're going to explore how we can avoid using those global modules. So if you remember, we've installed two global modules so far. We installed Babel CLI, which is allowing us to run the Babel command from the command line, and we've installed Live Server, which is letting us run Live Server. This is fantastic, but it's not ideal, and it's not ideal for a few reasons. First up, our package.json file no longer defines all of the dependencies someone needs to actually run this application. They don't know, for example, they need Babel CLI and Live Server. So that means if we are collaborating on this project with someone else, or we're allowing it to be open sourced so someone else can download it and work off of it, we're not really giving them all of the tools they need. The other disadvantage is that we've installed this globally. So imagine I have 5 or 6 React projects. By installing it globally, I'm saying that all of those projects have to use the same version of each of these global modules, and that might not be realistic for your application. It's best to define all of the dependencies and their exact versions in the package.json file for each one of your projects. One of the last disadvantages of using globals is the fact that we have to type out the entire command in the terminal. So if we do want to allow someone else to work on this project, or we're restarting the project on our own machine, we have to type out this entire thing and run it. It would be nice if we had an alias for this with a simple name like Babel script. That is exactly what we're going to do in just a little bit. So what is step 1? Step 1 is going to be to uninstall these global dependencies. Right here, we're going to do that via yarn global remove. This is going to remove the dependencies, and we want to remove two, Babel CLI, and we're also going to remove Live Server, and we can just put a space between the two of them as opposed to running yarn global remove twice. Now, when I do run this, it's going to be uninstalling those global dependencies, which means that when we do try to rerun things like Babel or Live Server, they're actually going to fail. We're not going to have access to those global commands anymore, and if I do try to run Babel, we can see we're getting an error. There is no such file or directory, and it's trying to find the module that at one point was installed correctly. Now, we're also no longer going to have access to Live Server. So if I were to shut down Live Server and try to restart it, you're going to see we get the exact same error. So let's go ahead and fix this by installing both of these locally, and I'm going to do that over here in the very first tab. First up, let me use clear to clear the terminal output. Instead of yarn global add, we're just going to be using yarn add, which is what we did for the two local dependencies we already have. First up is Live Server. Second up is Babel CLI. And for Babel CLI, I am going to lock us into the same version we were using previously, 6.24.1. Now, when we install this, instead of getting all of the code and installing it globally, it's getting all of the code and it's jamming that into the node modules folder. And right here, you can see our two new dependencies were installed. We have Babel CLI and we have Live Server. Both are showing up correctly. Now, all of this is great, but it still doesn't give us access to these from the terminal. So if I were to run Babel, we're getting the exact same error we got before. Instead of running them from the terminal, we're going to be setting up scripts inside of package.json. That's where we're going to define how we want to use those dependencies. Let's go ahead and clear the output and get that done. Step 1 is to define these scripts inside of package.json. That requires us to add a new property onto the root object. You can add it wherever you want. I'm just going to put mine right before dependencies. And the name inside of double quotes needs to be scripts. That name is important. Now we can set up our scripts. This is equal to an object. And inside of that object, we define all of the scripts we want. And we're going to be setting up two. We're going to be setting up one to run Live Server, just as we had it. And we'll be setting up another one to run the Babel CLI, as we had it before. Let's kick it off with the Live Server one, because that's a little easier. So this is a key value pair. The key is the name we give to the script, and the value is the script itself. So before we ran Live Server with the public directory, we're going to type that out exactly as we had it earlier, and then we give it a name. So I'm going to call this one serve. Now I can run this script based off of just this name. I don't need to retype out any of this. And instead of using the global Live Server module, it's going to be using the locally installed one. Let's go ahead and save package.json and run our serve script. To run the script, we're going to be using yarn run followed by the script name. We just called our serve, so we're going to type that. When we do this, it's going to run live server, which means it's going to automatically load the app in the browser. But if we switch back over to the terminal, we can see right here, it ran the live server command, and we're getting the exact same output we got from live server as we saw earlier. Now that we have the serve command set up, let's go ahead and add another one for Babel. Right here, I'm going to add a second property onto this object by tossing a comma at the end and setting up my key value pairs. The name for this script could be something along the lines of build. That is going to allow us to build our application using Babel. Then over here, we're going to define the actual script itself. If you remember, it was Babel followed by source/app.js, followed by the out file argument where we specified where we want that output file to go. That was public/scripts/app.js. And the last argument we provided was presets. Presets got set equal to env, React. We want to make sure to use both of those. And then we had told Babel to keep watching for changes, not just to run a single time. We did that using watch. Now that we have this really long script typed out, we never need to type it again. Instead, we can just run build from the terminal. Now I already have live server running over here. So in my second tab, I'm going to use yarn run again, this time running build. When I do that behind the scenes, it's going to run that very long command, and that means we never need to type that again. Instead, we can just run this simple one, and that is going to get Babel started up. Now that Babel is started up, we can go ahead and check out our application. Right here, I'm going to crack open the command prompt, the console, just to make sure that there are no errors, and everything seems to work really well. If I were to go ahead and change the application, just as we saw before, those changes should show up. So right here, for example, I'm going to tweak the header component, just adding some text in, test text. I'm going to save it. The browser should refresh, and we do see test text showing up, which means that even though we are using package.json scripts, the app is still working exactly as it was before. Now, once again, what are the advantages? There are three big ones. First off, all of our dependencies are now defined right in here. So if someone wants to start using our app, they can actually get everything installed that they need. We also have the versions defined in here, meaning that we can use a different version of each of these tools across all of our applications. Last up, all of this allowed us to create scripts. That means we can define the things that we need to do, and instead of typing out really long commands, we can just run a script by its name. In this case, we have two. We have serve and we have build. All of this means that we can successfully avoid global modules going forward. There's nothing inherently awful about them, but it's best to use local modules for the reasons we just outlined. Now let's go ahead and install Webpack as a local module and get that set up. It's coming up in the next video, so stay tuned. I'll see you then.